Welcome back. The panelists here, former Undersecretary of State Rick Stengel. He's author of the new book, Information Wars, How We Lost the Global Battle Against Disinformation and What We Can Do About It. Kind of timely. Okay, Henderson, news director for the Radio Iowa Network, NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker, and Rich Lowry, editor of National Review and author of the new book, The Case for Nationalism, How It Made Us Powerful, United, and Free. Rich, I'm going to start with you. Senator Johnson on Friday was part of the, even Senator Ron Johnson seemed to have an issue with quid pro quo. Perhaps it was something that he was sensitive to, and he wanted to make it clear this morning, I'm on the president's side. The demand for loyalty from this president is pretty strong.
Well, it's always been fraught and perilous dissenting from a president of your own party. What's new is the grip that Trump has on the party and the fact that he can destroy your career possibly with a couple tweets. So everyone's aware of that. Yeah. But, Chuck, I do think there are distinctions here, and there are multiple things that can be true. There's nothing inappropriate about a president urging a foreign leader to cooperate with his attorney general on a duly constituted probe of the sources of the Russia investigation. What's improper and inappropriate is the focus on the Bidens. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me the best position for Republicans would be one I happen to agree with, and I think it's true. It was improper to focus on the Bidens, but the level and the magnitude of this offense does not justify impeaching and possibly removing a president 12 months before an election. What's interesting is that seems to be Tucker Carlson seemed to signal a similar, the Daily Caller. I should put it up, Kristen. Here with what he said, essentially saying he should not have done that phone call at all. Donald Trump should not have been on the phone with a foreign head of state encouraging another country to investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden. Some Republicans are trying, but there's no way to spin this as a good idea. Once those in control of our government use it to advance their political goals, we become just another of the world's many corrupt countries. Tucker goes on to argue, the similar argument that Rich says, but this does not rise to impeachment. The founders would say, let the election happen. But does the president allow for that middle ground?
Well, he doesn't, because look at his attacks against Mitt Romney. Obviously, Mitt Romney on the other side of the spectrum. Right. Tucker Carlson is trying to walk a fine line here. I thought it was pretty remarkable because Tucker Carlson's been a pretty reliable ally of this president. So I'm curious to see what tweets he receives, because this is still criticism, to be sure. It's also reminiscent of how Democrats defended Bill Clinton during his impeachment. We disagree with what he did implicitly. At the same time, it's not impeachable. The question is, does that argument work? And Chuck, I think we can't underscore this enough. There seems to be a second whistleblower who is poised to come forward. Does this whistleblower change the conversation in any way?
Kay, you're the Iowan here. You're the red stater in that you see the people that get the two different realities. And some people live in one reality. Some people live in another reality. What Ron Johnson said to some people is going to sound like Chuck's the crazy one. And to others are going to say Johnson's the crazy one.
What I find interesting is when I'm talking to Republicans and Democrats, they're not paying attention to the drip of this. They couldn't name the cast of characters, number one. Number two, Republicans see this, at least in Iowa, as an extension of Mueller. They say this again, and they have come to the conclusion that the president will not be convicted. On the Democratic side, you go to Democratic presidential candidate events, they're not getting asked about impeachment because everybody knows where the candidates stand, number one. And Democrats have largely moved on. They're choosing someone to run against Donald Trump, and they don't think the Senate will convict.
You know, this seems to be the struggle, Rick, and I think everybody has this, is that people are searching for a guardrail, right? And if I think Republicans would be up for some consequence if it weren't impeachment, right? And yet nothing seems, because you got to do something to tell him to stop doing that. So far, he has no consequences on any of this. And I think there's some people going, can you put up a guardrail? Doesn't have to be impeachment, is what it sounds like, but people are frustrated there's no guardrails.
There are no guardrails anymore, and that's part of the problem of this rise in disinformation. Anybody can do it. The social media platforms are open to everyone. In fact, just to go back to what Senator Johnson started with, I mean, it's a classic Russian disinformation technique called whataboutism. To not answer the question, but to point out to something else. From the Cold War, the Russians would say, but you lynch black people, when we'd say you don't have freedom in your country. So part of the reason that there are no guardrails is that Donald Trump himself is the disinformationist in chief. He is the promulgator of false narratives like no one else is. And what that does is give permission to people to do it. Once upon a time, the president's words were golden, and everyone had to adhere to it. And now, basically, it's open season.
Well, that is a problem, right? If the president's words lack power.
Well, look, again, I'd make some distinctions. The idea that the DNC server is in Ukraine is wacky. The idea that Paul Manafort
President of the
is set
United
up,
States is believing
it's
this.
wacky.
I
But to Kay's point, to false narratives, Republican voters were told for 2.5 years there's this dastardly, treacherous conspiracy between the president and Russia. It would never seem plausible. It wasn't true. And then as they see this, well, it's just all never mind, and then 2 months later on to something else. And that's why there's a lot of skepticism about that, and that's why a lot of Republicans will like what Ron Johnson did this week.
No,
There was that relationship between Trump and Russia, which I talk about in my book. Russia said, I'm going to help you. He said, I welcome that help, and it happened. That's collusion. And the reason Ukraine comes back into this now and is so important is that Ukraine is that hinge point between Russia and the rest of the world, between the East and West. What Russia is fighting over is to have control over Ukraine. And what we used to fight for is a democratic and free Ukraine, which Trump betrayed in that phone call.
The idea that there was any deep conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the president and Russia was false. We had a huge report over it. It took 2.5 years, hundreds of pages. That was wrong. And just very few people have just admitted, well, I thought that might be true. I was wrong. I was miscued by all sorts of things. And it's just now we're on to a 5-alarm interpretation of this.
One of the things that's remarkable about this moment, though, as he faces this controversy and questions swirling around Ukraine, is that he doubled and tripled down on this all week long, called on China to investigate Joe Biden. And I think that's the president's strategy, to effectively say, look, if I say it out loud, there is nothing wrong with it. Inside the White House, though, Chuck, they've been scrambling to get a more coherent strategy going.
The other part about my reporting in Iowa, though, is that Republicans will say, let Trump be Trump, and Trump will be Trump. Democrats are now saying the same thing. Trump is being Trump.
Right. Look, Joni Ernst may have summed it up best when she says, I could say this or that, and he's going to say whatever the heck he wants.
Everyone can agree Trump's going to be Trump.
Right.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.